At 16, I learned how quickly a family can become a closed courtroom. The memory doesn't arrive as a rush anymore. It comes the way legal facts do, flat, sequential, stripped of tone. Police lights washed the siding blue. My brother sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded, eyes red but dry. My mother kept saying the same sentence, each time a little louder, as if volume could convert it into truth. My father didn't look at me at all. He stared at the floor and nodded when the officer asked if he was sure. I remember thinking that, if I could just speak clearly enough, if I could choose the right words, this would stop. I hadn't yet learned that clarity means nothing when the story is already written. The charge was robbery. A convenience store 2 towns over. My brother had been there that night. His car was seen. The money was found in his room. But he had a future, they said later. Scholarships. Coaches calling the house. I had a part-time job and a reputation for being difficult. I asked questions. I didn't smooth myself into silence. At the station, my parents signed a statement. By the time they finished, I understood I was not defending myself against the police. I was being replaced. They didn't say goodbye when they dropped me at the farm. There was a trash bag in the trunk with clothes that didn't fit and a pair of boots I'd never worn. My mother stood beside the car, arms crossed, and said the sentence that still surfaces in my head whenever someone explains a necessary decision. We're not ruining his life to save yours. The farmer didn't ask what I'd done. He asked if I could lift 50 pounds and if I woke up early. The work was dull and constant. Mornings began before light. Evenings ended when your body stopped arguing. There was no cruelty there, which almost made it worse. No one to fight against. No one to convince. What surprised me was how useful anonymity can be. No one at the farm knew me as a problem. I was a pair of hands. I learned to be careful with paperwork because feed deliveries went missing and blame moved fast. I learned that adults listen when you show them records instead of feelings. I learned that silence, when chosen, has weight. I aged out of the system quietly. A caseworker checked a box. I left with a bus ticket and no address. I worked nights and studied days. Law wasn't a calling. It was a language I wanted to be fluent in so no one could speak over me again. By the time I passed the bar, my parents were no longer villains. They were abstractions. A case study I rarely revisited. My brother existed somewhere in the distance, a man whose life I did not track. That distance felt like healing. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was functional. 13 years after the farm, I was reviewing a deposition when my assistant knocked once and said my last name in a tone I didn't recognize. Your parents are here. They looked older than I expected. Smaller. My father's hands shook when he reached for the chair. My mother tried to smile and failed. For a moment, no one spoke. The office felt too quiet, the way it does before a verdict. They didn't apologize. Not directly. They talked about stress, about fear, about how things had gotten out of control. My brother had been arrested again, this time with evidence that couldn't be rearranged. The prosecutor was serious. They needed help. They needed me. I listened. I asked procedural questions. Dates, charges, jurisdiction. My voice sounded professional even to me. Inside, something old moved, but it didn't have a name anymore. I told them I couldn't represent him. Conflict of interest. It was true, and it was also sufficient. My mother's face collapsed in a way that was almost theatrical. She said my name the way she used to when I was a child and had disappointed her. You owe him, she said. You always did. I didn't respond to that. I told them what I could do, refer them to a competent public defender, explain the process, make sure they understood their options. My father asked if I could talk to someone. He didn't say who. He didn't have to. This is where the story usually turns, if it's told by someone else. This is where a door slams or a speech happens. What happened instead was a scheduling conflict that the prosecutor assigned to my brother's case had clerked with me years earlier. When my parents mentioned my name at intake, it triggered a mandatory disclosure. Within a week, an ethics officer from the state bar contacted me, not as an accusation, but as a boundary. I was instructed, formally and unmistakably, to have no involvement whatsoever. No calls, no advice, no back-channel conversations. It was clean. External. There was no room for interpretation. I forwarded the email to my parents. I attached a list of defense attorneys. I wished them luck. They didn't reply. The case moved forward without me. I followed it the way you follow weather, aware, detached, unable to change its direction. My brother took a plea. The sentence was lighter than it could have been, heavier than they wanted. When it was over, I felt nothing like triumph. Weeks later, my mother left a voicemail. She cried. She said she didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. She said families should protect each other. I deleted the message. Not out of anger. Out of accuracy. Protection had already been defined for me years ago with a trash bag and a sentence that didn't include my name. I still think about forgiveness. Not as an act, but as a concept. Something discussed often, rarely implemented cleanly. What I chose instead was alignment. Between what happened, what is, and what I'm responsible for now. Some people mistake restraint for punishment. It isn't. It's a boundary you build so the past can't keep voting on your life. When I lock my office at night, there's no sense of having won. There's only the quiet knowledge that the story didn't repeat itself. And that, for me, is enough.